Over the last few years, I've had the good fortune to present at several professional developments. This one's a little different. I asked Dr. Rapp and Mrs. Niermeyer if I could speak this year on the subject of Christian witness. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to kind of share the results of my work on this. Okay, you all right with that? All right, good, thank you. So last year, I was lucky to be named to a fellowship of the Duke and Altum Schools Collaborative to go help advance the mission of Catholic schools in the United States. And this year, well, last year I guess, 12 teachers nationwide were named as fellows of the program. It also includes Austin, Austin, who was named fellow. In addition to our research, we've been asked to complete a project of our own design that advances Catholic education. The result of Austin's work is going to become the FatherSon, the mandatory retreat. Is it this weekend? Yeah? Saturday. Mine's turned into a model of faith sharing designed to present witnesses to students like we would do during Modern Day Week or during God Week. So this is what I asked to present, the model that I've developed for answering, writing, and delivering a speech of Christian witness to our students. In 2018, a friend of mine, who's now a professor of theology at Thomas Aquinas College, wrote on social media about an experience of Christian witness that he had from a teacher in high school. This moment pretty much breaks all of the rules that I'm going to lay out for you here in a minute, but it's a great example of the power of witness to shape the spiritual life, and with Dr. O'Neill's permission, I'd like to share it with you. He writes, I was raised Catholic, but quite nominally so. The education I received at home was largely Protestant. We only attended church a few times a year. We were Easter and Christmas Catholics. I actually attended Catholic school K through 12, but the religious education was very poor. I'd always had a deep interest in the question of God, but given the superficial Catholic education I received, I spent my early high school years studying Hinduism, and Buddhism, and Islam. I was looking for answers and open to finding them anywhere except Christianity. It was at this time that I encountered a high school literature teacher who changed my life. He was devoutly Catholic, scholarly, speculative, sarcastic. He subtly challenged our philosophical presuppositions and taught us authentic Catholicism through literature. I began taking every class of his that I could. Every work pulled me in a little bit more. Sophocles, Plato, Herman Melville, Walker Percy. In Fantasy Lit, we read Lewis's That Hideous Strength. The fictional St. Anne's High School depicted authentic Christian community. By this point, something had grabbed hold of me and would not let go. I was being fed intellectually and spiritually. And this was being done as I was vehemently set against the truth of Catholicism. The clinching point, however, was less philosophical or theological. I think those chains had been broken and the stage was set for a true conversion. And it happened in the Bible as Literature unit with the same teacher. We read the Gospel of St. John, and Mr. Renner got towards the end of chapter 6, the Bread of Life discourse. Of course, he presented the text as revelatory of the real presence in the Eucharist. K through 12 Catholic school, I had never been taught about the real presence. However, at the end of the discourse, many disciples leave Christ behind, and it's easy to overlook how this must have saddened Jesus. Mr. Renner began reading more slowly. He quoted our Lord, speaking solemnly and sadly to the apostles, "Will you, too, leave me?" And St. Peter responds, "Lord, to whom else would we go?" Mr. Renner stopped there, and the classroom went quiet. He turned his back to us. After several awkward moments for us students, he stepped out of the room and into his office next door. We were all very confused. There was still a few minutes left of class. Should we leave? What happened? Did he get mad? We somehow realized, maybe through a few students who had noticed and then told the rest of us, that he had broken down into tears. This was a man that I would not believe could cry. We'd gone through all the great Greek tragedies and the American dramas together. The love of Jesus Christ for the apostles and their abandonment to him, where else is there to go? I witnessed in Charles Renner that day palpable and profound faith, hope, and charity in Jesus Christ. And I was absolutely shaken by this. I think of that moment and that verse often, and it still shakes me. Without that moment, I fear to imagine what I would have become. Every moment in my life since then that's had any value at all has been a participation in that moment. It was the beginning of my falling in love with Jesus Christ. That love is woefully imperfect, but whatever is there flows from this moment of gratuitous grace. It's Dr. Taylor O'Neill writing in 2018. Now, I can't speak for your experience in giving Christian witness. Those kind of moments rarely come up in my class. When Dr. O'Neill told me the story in 2018, I had already been teaching at St. James for several years. I had a pretty good file folder of previously written witnesses that I could just go pull out of the cabinet and go share again. But hearing about his experience with Christian witness made my work, what's St. Paul say? It's the clanging gongs, it's the crashing cymbals. And so it inspired me to consider my own witnesses more carefully. And that's what I want to share with you, the fruit of that consideration. Essentially, I found 6 parts of giving Christian witness that, at least in my experience as I understand it. So the first one is the question of the topic, to consider what is the topic that comes to us. And it comes from the campus ministry office. George will send out an email when you least want it, and it's going to give us a prompt to respond to with our witnesses. You may also get asked to give a witness to a student or to a faculty retreat. This method works the same for that. I've come to kind of dread the campus ministry email. I found that it's pretty hard for me for a couple of reasons. First, it's hard to respond to somebody else's prompt. And I think as a teacher, I can appreciate that when I give my students an essay question or a free response question, they have to respond to my prompt. So I can appreciate that. And then second, even after all these years, I haven't really fully trained my heart to be attentive to the spiritual life. So I have to work at it. My heart doesn't automatically jump to the experiences of grace that I've received. And I'm kind of bad at spiritual reflection because I've never really fully trained my mind for it. So while I usually understand the email that George is going to send, I rarely know how to respond. So with all due respect to the campus ministry office, sorry, Deborah, I've learned to think of the prompts as more of a suggestion than a question. And I'm going to go ahead and give you permission to do the same thing. I don't have the authority to give you that permission, but you have my blessing, okay? So feel free to riff on the theme. Consider it a starting point for your reflection. It's not a test question. You have to specifically answer. It's more important to keep the big picture in mind. How are you responding to God's grace? How are you inspired by Marian virtue? Tie it to the specific prompt if you can, but don't be a slave to it. Previous years' Modern Day Weeks, God Week witnesses might include, when was a time you experienced or witnessed Mary's motherly protection or life-giving love? Mary, the Mother of God, has drawn me closer to Jesus. How? Or during God Week, when was a moment that your faith became your own? Or one that bore a lot of fruit with me. When is a time in your life when you knew God was at work? All of these prompts are very answerable on their own, but again, don't be a slave to it. The important part is that you are reflecting and sharing your interactions with grace. So that's step one. Take the prompt seriously, but use it to serve God, not God to serve the prompt. The second is to consider your audience. When you're writing your witness, consider your audience. And I mean this in a few different ways. So first, consider the students that are going to receive your witness. We know that there is a huge maturity difference between freshmen and even really like the first half of sophomore year, those first 3 semesters of high school and the next 5 semesters of high school. First semester sophomores are really still 8th graders. So there's a huge maturity difference between them. So if you are teaching younger students, it is way easy to get too real with people that aren't really equipped or aren't ready to go handle big topics. Be serious with them, be legit with your audience, but keep a little bit of separation between you and younger students, just on some of the topics you got. Now, when you have students in later years, you can let them in a little deeper. Do not scandalize people. Do not give people the license to say, well, Mr. Wahlberg was a degenerate, maybe I'll be a degenerate. I'll just change later, right? Like we don't want the St. Augustine line, the Lord make me chaste later. Like we don't want to like green light that one. So, but it is okay to say that you were in a dark place or that you made serious but unspecified mistakes. There's that line between maintaining your professional integrity, but also the vulnerability of letting God to work in ways we don't expect. Yeah. I've sometimes even given different witnesses for house because you develop a relationship with your house over the years. You get to know them. And what I'm giving to my classes, which are, all juniors or all sophomores. When I would go and talk to my team, I might give a different kind of set of witness to a team. But it's, because your relationship with your audience is different, and so it's okay to have different, reactions to a prompt with different people. The second part of considering your audience is to remember that you are standing before your God and talking about your relationship with Him, and He knows if you're faking it. Now that's a little bit of a different topic, and I'm not actually against the idea of putting the best interpretation on your relationship. We build virtue by practicing virtue. It's why, as parents, we tell our kids to say, tell your sister you're sorry, when, he is totally not sorry, right? Because you build virtue by practicing it. You're like, oh, I am supposed to be sorry for pushing her, whatever it is, right? So you build virtue by practicing virtue, and there's plenty of room for a Christian to build up his or her own receptivity to grace by interpreting our stories in the best way. But you can't lie about it. Temptation is great, particularly when you are a young teacher or you don't understand the prompt. But it's better to share a poor witness than a fake one. But and this is the third part. This is the most important part. Your primary audience is you. You are your primary audience. Writing a witness is a great time to remember your own interactions with God's grace for your sake. Put yourself first when you are considering these prompts. Let yourself stew in the question. I come into this room by myself. I don't come down during adoration. I don't read a book or a Bible. It's not spiritual reading. I just come and sit in the prompt. It's not even like deep prayer. I just give myself a minute to let God talk to me about His work, because I am the real audience for my witness. I need to give God the time to show me what I am apparently missing. So that's step 2. Consider the audience, your students, your God, and yourself. Okay, so the third one is to consider what the time allotted would be. Decide how much time you have for your witness. There have been times, and I think this is absolutely appropriate, that I have burned an entire block period on a witness. It was a couple of class hours. I had a good relationship with the students. I had a good story to talk about. Had a good conversation out of it. But honestly, that's pretty rare. That's only happened a couple of times in all the ones that I've given. And for most of us, most years, the witness is just one segment of the class, either right before you get into your curriculum or at the last few minutes of your curriculum, right? But still, you need to decide how much time you're going to give. You're not expected to burn a day, but you are expected to participate in as much as you can during the time. So it's part of your contract. Your students know if you blow it off, so give it some time. As for pacing, if you're not used to writing what a speech might look like, 4 pages, double-spaced, read at a medium pace is about 5 minutes. Don't go less than 5 minutes unless you have a really good reason to. In my experience, 8 minutes is the sweet spot. 6 pages, double-spaced, medium-paced. That's where I shoot for most years. After about 10 minutes, it gets awkward for most of us. And you should only do that if you have that relationship with your team, with your students, with your house. I'm not saying don't do it, but do it judiciously. Incidentally, I learned as a young teacher that we live in our reputations for good and for bad. Like right now, John Muehlberger knows which teachers are going to refer the most students to the office. At the beginning of the year, he can tell you which teachers are going to send down the most kids. Tom Radke knows exactly which teachers are going to make him be the bad guy, because that's how they're handling their classroom discipline. Those guys will support you, but they know right now who you are. Dr. Rapp knows which teachers are going to get parent phone calls because the teacher said something stupid in class. And it's me, by the way. I'm the one that you're going to get the most on. But the Faith Formation Office absolutely knows which teachers are going to skip their witnesses. So just saying, if you have the reputation for shortchanging your witnesses, might behoove you to change your reputation. So the next part is that actually set it on your calendar. Write it into your lesson plan for the week. I like to give my witnesses as early in the week as possible. Sometimes I've even followed up in the second class of that week, right? Like the second A day. I want to kind of follow back up on the topic. You need to do it sometime within the allotted week. You can do it whatever it is. But Modern Day Week is a week. It is not a 40-day festival. If that's the time, you do it in the week. Unless like you're not there that week or something. Unless there's some reason you would not do it during that time. So that's step 3. Set a date and a target time for your witness. And then actually write it. This is the meat of the process where you're actually planning what you're going to say. Everybody has their own style. Some people like to work from an outline or from bullet points. I literally write a script. This is exactly what my witnesses look like, that I write a whole script for it. I want to pick my words carefully. I want to organize my thoughts carefully. It's 100% okay to use note cards. You do not have to stand up there and do it from memory. Some people make PowerPoint slides. Others will bring in a piece of art. Some just stand up and tell a story. All of these things are okay. It doesn't matter what style you're going to work in or what your notes look like. It's also okay to go without notes as long as you have seriously considered what you're going to say ahead of time. This is the most important part. I have it in capital letters. I should yell it at you. You absolutely cannot wing it. You absolutely cannot wing it. Even if you think you're a good winger, and we're pretty good wingers, you absolutely cannot wing it. You have to organize your thoughts ahead of time. It tells your audience that you respect them, that you have thought about what they should hear, that you have seriously considered God's grace at least once before the moment you're standing up and talking about it, right? So like you absolutely cannot wing it. If you wing it, it's going to be obvious. Everybody will know it. The faith life is not like a jelly donut. So it tells your students, if you're winging it, that you don't really care to explore big topics with them. Now, for me, this is sometimes actually the hardest part, to actually do the writing. So in the years of giving witnesses or God Week talks, I think this is the model. The first one, consider the prompt. This is what we did in our part 1. Can I answer this directly? Do I need to interpret this prompt in a fair manner? Second, consider people that I know when I'm writing it. This is fertile ground. So who are the people in my life that inspire my faith life? Now, just a little heads up on this one. Family members are absolutely great people to inspire us towards faith. And there are a lot of people that see their mother as an example of Marian virtue. But our students are going to hear from a half dozen people who think their mom reminds them of Mary. It's awesome to know that St. James Academy has such great mothers. But I think it's also okay if we widen our view a little bit. Most of us don't actually know your mother. I'm sure she's great. But is there somebody closer to St. James or to our common experience that you can connect to? It could be a coworker. It could be a student. I mean, how many of us have said, like, man, I wish my prayer life looked like her prayer life, right? Like, that could be totally awesome. It's good to get their permission first, give them a heads up. It's going to be awkward if, like, people, Mr. Wahlberg, everybody kept talking about you during God Week. Like, let me know ahead of time. Or what I do a lot is I connect it to my spiritual reading. Sometimes a Bible story is going to pop right in there right away. Sometimes I got to be kind of reminded about Bible stories, so I will literally Google Bible stories about trusting God. And like, oh, that's what I was missing. I forgot that one. I forgot it. I knew it. I just forgot it. Or saints that relate to the prompt. You could work this into your witness thinking like, I wanted to learn more about somebody else who dealt with this topic. And that's how I found St. Walburga. Or it reminds me of the case of St. Walburga, right? Like you could kind of work that into there. That's a good fertile ground for your witness talks. But here's the most important. You have to tell your own story. It's hugely important. I have totally given witness talks that are not my story, that are more like catechetical. Here's what the Catholic Church says about X. Or worse, this is what I think about X, right? Like that's not a witness. Might be good catechetical work, might catechize a little bit in your witness, but it's not what a witness is. A witness is your experience with grace. If there's a car wreck and you need to tell Officer Derek about it, you're going to give your witness statement about what you saw. You're not going to talk about the physics of the car accident, right? You need to talk about what you saw. So you absolutely have to tell your own story. This is weird and uncomfortable for me to get personal with my students. I would prefer if my students don't think that I have an outside life at all. I wish that my students thought of me as the guy that overdresses and is a smart aleck history nerd who writes long emails. Like, that's the character I like to play, and I wish that my students just totally saw me as that. But like, that's not a Christian witness. I have to let people in. And you have to tell your own story. You're going to plumb the topic in your own way. I have a lot of examples of me working myself into a bad position and praying to have God bail me out, right? When did I have to give up on my own power and rely on Him? When did I have to abandon myself to God's mercy? I have a lot of those stories to work with. It's a deep well. Others have stories of great pain or sickness or poverty or fate when God has rescued us, of surrendering to obedience. There's also another approach, and it's one that honestly I struggle to develop in my own heart. It's knowing the blessings of grace and being receptive to that. You might say, counselors might say, I have a deficiency narrative when I'm thinking about grace, right? I tend to think about my sins more than God's love. But it's the reality that blessings and grace are also fertile topics for witnesses. Experiences with the sublime, with the person that we love, the people that God has put into our lives. Paying attention to the ordinary interactions with God's grace is a great way to consider witness talks. So that's the fourth step. You actually have to write it. 5 is that you actually have to go practice this. You actually have to go practice your witness. I always rehearse my witnesses before giving them, usually several times, if it's just to make sure that it all sounds good out loud or to estimate my pace of speaking. Like I learned, I've talked pretty fast in this session to get it all in. So there's no better prep than to read it out loud. If you have ever had to write anything, just stop, and before you send it or email it up, just read it out loud to yourself. You will find all of the little phrasing pieces that you need to rewrite. If you're working from a script like I do, reading it out loud will find all the little holes in the story, it'll fix your phrasing. If you're working from an outline or bullet points, it'll clue you into all the transitions that you either are awkward or you need to find a transition. But you have to run through your witness talks before the moment you get up there. It's part of the preparation that respects your audience. Also, think about the mechanics of your delivery. What will your posture be during the witness? Are you standing at a podium? Or are you pacing around in the same 60 square feet, right? Whatever it is, you have to consider what is your mechanics. What's appropriate to your style? What's appropriate to a witness? If you need some emotional separation, it is totally okay to get behind the podium, get behind the ambo, like this is a fort, right? Like if you need some emotional separation because you're going to get real, that's totally okay. The podium can be your security blanket. I usually, if I'm going to give a witness, I sit down in a chair, I get eye level with my audience. I want to approach my audience as equals in the spiritual life, so I get down on eye level with them. But don't do something that's going to make you uncomfortable. If that's not cool, then don't do it. It'll be awkward for you, it'll be awkward for your audience. Creates a barrier. The 6th piece is something that I only started doing recently, and it blew me away, and that is the piece of invitation. So it's become my favorite part of witness. I begin my witness talks asking for someone's permission to give them the witness talk. It's like, hey, it's Mater Dei week. Can I share my witness with you? They're all going to say yes. Like that, nobody will say, no, I don't want to hear that. Right? Like that, yes. No, get us straight to AP US history. Like, no, they're like, yes, they will hear you. So first thing I do is I ask the permission to give the witness. That also shows your audience that you respect them, that you want to be invited into a conversation. So that's the first piece. And then when I finish sharing the story, I start telling students that I have more to talk about this, and I would like to share it more, but we'll have to do it at a different time. So come find me during Thunderblock. I would love to tell you more about this. You can come by yourself. You can bring a couple people if you want. That's fine. But just to leave people to open, like, there's more to this, and I will tell you more if you want to know. Or if my students have something they want to tell me. If this has brought up a conversation they want to talk to me about, I want to leave that door open. Hey, if you got a story you want to tell me about it, come find me during Thunderblock. I want to hear about it too. You could by yourself, come with other people, right? But leave the door open to make the conversation go longer. Because Christian Witness isn't a Netflix episode. We don't watch it passively and then turn it off when we're done, right? It's a moment of conversion. It's a moment of conversion for us and for others. Be active in it and invite other people to take part. Now, I didn't do this for years, honestly, because I was kind of afraid of the conversations. My fear of the conversation shut down that possibility. But I'm trying to be brave by acting bravely. It's the build virtue by practicing virtue. So I write it into the script, and I'm going to force myself to do it. I need to be brave in my spiritual life, so I need to act bravely. I'm going to fake it till I make it. So that's the sixth part of Christian witness. It's an invitation to further witness. It's totally optional, but I think you will find that it bears good fruit if you do it. And so to that end, I'd like to hear what your experiences are with Christian witness. You'll have to do it after this. You come back, you come, by yourself. You're going to bring a couple people. That's fine. We meet during Thunderblock. It's fine. But I would like to know what your experience is, or if you, want to talk more about this. I would love it. But thank you for coming. I know you had to come here because Dr. Rapp made you, but I'm still glad you're here, and it's been great. Thanks, guys.